can I go forward when I don't know which way I'm facing?
The wild world of rock and roll is where rumors often blur the line between fact and fiction. So get ready for 20 more rumors about musicians that turned out to be totally true. Brace yourselves for some jaw-dropping revelations. 20. Charles Manson wrote a song for the Beach Boys. Did you know that one of the most infamous cult leaders of all time had a connection to one of the most beloved bands of the 1960s? That's right, we're talking about Charles Manson and the Beach Boys. You might think this is a joke, but it's not. It's a shocking and disturbing fact that reveals a dark side of the music industry. Charles Manson was a wannabe musician who befriended Dennis Wilson, the drummer of the Beach Boys, in 1968. Manson and his followers, known as the Family, moved into Wilson's mansion and lived there for several months, costing him thousands of dollars in expenses and damages. During this time, Manson played some of his songs for Wilson, who was impressed by his talent and charisma. One of Manson's songs, called Cease to Exist, caught Wilson's attention. He liked the melody in the chorus, but he changed some of the lyrics to make it more appealing. He also changed the title to Never Learn Not to Love, and claimed it as his own. He recorded it with the Beach Boys and released it as a B-side of their single Bluebirds Over the Mountain in 1968. Manson was furious when he found out that Wilson had altered his song and taken credit for it. He felt betrayed and demanded royalties and recognition. He even threatened to kill Wilson and his bandmates if they didn't comply. Wilson tried to appease him by giving him some money and a motorcycle, but it was not enough. Manson's anger and resentment grew, and he became more violent and paranoid. A year later, Manson and his family committed one of the most horrific crimes in American history, the Tate LaBianca murders. They killed 7 people, including actress Sharon Tate, who was pregnant at the time. They wrote messages on the walls such as Helter Skelter, Pigs, and Death to Pigs. They believed they were starting a race war and fulfilling Manson's apocalyptic vision. 19. Christine McVie wrote a song about having an affair and told her husband a lie. Imagine being married to a rock star and writing a hit song about cheating on him with another rock star. And then imagine lying to him and saying the song is about your pet. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's exactly what Christine McVie of Fleetwood Mac did in the late 1970s. Christine McVie was the keyboardist and vocalist of Fleetwood Mac, one of the most successful bands of all time. She was married to John McVie, the bassist of the band, but their relationship was falling apart. She found comfort and romance in the arms of Dennis Wilson, the drummer of the Beach Boys. They had a secret affair that lasted for 2 years. During this time, Christine wrote a song called You Make Loving Fun. But there was a problem. How could Christine explain the meaning of the song to her husband, who was also in the band? She couldn't tell him the truth. That would be too hurtful and risky. So she came up with a clever lie. She told him that the song was about her dog, a black Labrador named Scooter. She said that Scooter made her happy and that he was the only one who could make loving fun. John believed her and even played the song on stage with her, unaware of the real inspiration behind it. He only found out the truth years later after they divorced. He was shocked and angry, but he also admitted that it was a great song. He said, "I'd rather she wrote a song about my dog than someone else." 18. Nikki Sixx was declared dead at one point. How many times can you cheat death and live to tell the tale? If you're Nikki Sixx, the answer is at least once. The Motley Crue bassist and songwriter had a close encounter with the Grim Reaper that left him clinically dead for 2 minutes. But he didn't let that stop him from rocking on. It was December 23, 1987, and Sixx was living the ultimate rock and roll lifestyle to the max. He had been partying hard with his friends, including members of Guns N' Roses and Rat, and enjoying life like there was no tomorrow. Well, for him, there almost wasn't. After one last shot of a deadly substance, Sixx collapsed on the floor, turning blue and losing his pulse. His companions tried to revive him, but to no avail. The paramedics arrived and pronounced him dead on the scene. He was loaded into an ambulance covered with his sheet and given up for lost. But he wasn't ready to go. He fought back, and suddenly he came back to life. The paramedics had injected him with 2 shots of adrenaline, which jump-started his heart. He woke up with a jolt, ripped out his tubes, and ran out of the ambulance. He hitched a ride home with 2 teenage girls who had heard on the radio that he was dead. Sixx had survived the impossible. He had been to the edge and back, and he had a story to tell. He wrote a song about his near-death experience called "Kickstart My Heart," which became a hit for Motley Crue. He also went to rehab and got sober, realizing he had a second chance at life. Nikki Sixx's brush with death was one of the most shocking and inspiring stories in rock history. He proved that nothing could kill him, not even himself. He also showed that you can overcome your demons and turn your life around. He was a rock star, a rebel, and a survivor. 17. Steven Tyler adopted a girl so he can date her. Number 17 might make you cringe. Rock and roll is full of wild stories, but few are as shocking as the one involving Steven Tyler and a teenage girl he adopted. The Aerosmith frontman not only dated a 16-year-old, but he also became her legal guardian. And that's not even the worst part. The girl's name was Julia Holcomb, and she met Tyler in 1973 when he was 27 and she was 16. She had a troubled family life, and Tyler offered her a way out. He convinced her mother to sign over custody to him so he could take her on tour with his band. He claimed he loved her and wanted to marry her, but he also exposed her to a world of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Holcomb soon became pregnant with Tyler's child, but he changed his mind about having a family. He pressured her into getting an abortion, which was a traumatic and painful experience for her, and anyone in that sense. He even did rock and roll things in the hospital while she was undergoing the procedure. He then dumped her and sent her back home, ending their 3.5-year relationship. Steven Tyler's relationship with Julia Holcomb was one of the most scandalous and disturbing episodes in rock history. He used his power and authority over a young and vulnerable girl and then abandoned her when she needed him the most. He showed us that the rock and roll lifestyle can take unexpected and dark turns, and that some secrets are better left buried. 16. Van Halen banned brown M&Ms. You might think that rock stars have it all: fame, fortune, and fun. But they also have to deal with a lot of hassle and stress, especially when they go on tour. They have to perform in different venues with different equipment and different rules. They have to make sure that everything is safe and sound and that nothing goes wrong. That's why Van Halen, one of the most legendary rock bands of all time, came up with a clever and cunning way to test the quality and reliability of their hosts. They inserted a clause in their contract that demanded a bowl of M&Ms in their dressing room, with all the brown ones removed. If they found any brown M&Ms, they had the right to cancel the show and get paid in full. It sounds like a ridiculous and petty request, but it was actually a brilliant and practical trick. The M&Ms clause was buried in a long and detailed list of technical specifications known as the rider that the band required for their elaborate and explosive stage show. The rider included things like the type and size of the stage, the number and wattage of the lights, the quality and volume of the sound system, and the safety and security measures. The band knew that if they found any brown M&Ms, it meant that the promoter had not read the rider carefully, and that there could be other, more serious problems with the venue. They would then do a thorough inspection of the equipment in the facilities and demand that everything be fixed or replaced. If not, they would walk away and sue the promoter for breach of contract. The M&Ms clause was a way for Van Halen to ensure that they got the best possible conditions for their performance and that they avoided any potential disasters. It was also a way for them to assert their power and authority and to show that they were not to be messed with. It was a peculiar and rock and roll way to deal with the challenges of touring, and it worked. 15. Iggy Pop checked into a mental hospital. Some people think that punk rock is all about chaos, rebellion, and anarchy. They think that punk rockers are fearless, reckless, and invincible. They think that punk rockers don't care about anything, not even themselves. But they are wrong. Punk rockers are human too, and sometimes they need help. That's what happened to Iggy Pop, the godfather of punk rock, who checked into a mental hospital in 1975. Iggy Pop was a legend, a pioneer in music. He was the leader of the Stooges, the band that invented punk rock before anyone else. He was the man who sang "I Wanna Be Your Dog," "Search and Destroy," and "Lust for Life." He was the man who performed shirtless, bleeding, and high on stage. He was the man who inspired generations of musicians from David Bowie to Kurt Cobain. But he was also a man who suffered from an addiction, depression, and questionable thoughts. So he checked into the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute hoping to get clean or at least to stay alive. He spent 3 months there undergoing therapy, medication, and electroshock treatment. He met other patients, some of whom became his friends. He wrote songs, some of which became his classics. He learned to cope, to heal, to survive. Iggy Pop checked out of the mental hospital and checked back into the world. He teamed up with Bowie and recorded 2 of his best albums, The Idiot and Lust for Life. He resumed his career and reclaimed his fame. He proved that even the wildest rockers need a moment of respite. He proved that mental health matters, even in the world of punk rock. He proved that he was more than a punk rocker. He was a survivor. 14. Mick Jagger and David Bowie dancing in the sheets. Mick Jagger and David Bowie were 2 of the biggest rock stars of the 1970s. They were both charismatic, talented, and successful. They were also both bisexual, or at least curious. They met in 1973 and soon became friends and rivals. They admired and challenged each other, and they also flirted and teased each other. They were like magnets, drawn to each other by their similarities and differences. But did they ever cross the line from friendship to romance? According to some sources, they did. In 1976, they were reportedly caught in bed together by Bowie's then-wife, Angie. She claimed that she walked in on them naked and cuddling, and that she was not surprised or angry. She said that they were just having fun and that it was not a big deal. Was it actually true? Jagger and Bowie never confirmed nor denied the story, but they also never stopped being friends. They continued to work together and to support each other. They even joked about their rumored affair and made fun of their own image. They were not ashamed or embarrassed. They were proud and confident. 13. Little Richard fired Jimi Hendrix from his backup band. How would you feel if you were fired by one of the greatest rock and roll stars of all time? That's what happened to Jimi Hendrix, the guitar wizard who revolutionized rock music with his virtuosity and innovation. But before he became a legend, he was a struggling musician who played as a backup for various artists, including Little Richard, the godfather of rock and roll. Little Richard was the man who hired and fired Jimi Hendrix in the mid-1960s. Hendrix joined Little Richard's band, the Upsetters, after meeting him in Atlanta. He was impressed by Richard's talent and charisma and hoped to learn from him. He played guitar on some of Richard's songs, such as "I Don't Know What You Got, But It's Got Me" and "Dancing All Around the World." But he also clashed with him. Richard was a perfectionist, a control freak, and a diva. He didn't like Hendrix's flashy and flamboyant style, which he felt overshadowed his own. He didn't like Hendrix's habit of being late, of flirting with girls, and of playing solos with his teeth or behind his back. He didn't like Hendrix's ambition, which he saw as a threat. So he fired him. According to some sources, it was Richard's brother, Robert Pennyman, who delivered the news. He said, "I fired Hendrix, who was using the name Maurice James all the time I knew him. Hendrix was devastated, but he didn't give up. He moved on and formed his own band, the Jimi Hendrix Experience. He went on to create some of the most iconic and influential albums of rock history, such as Are You Experienced, Axis, Bold as Love, and Electric Ladyland." 12. Rod Stewart enjoyed things, in hindsight. If you think that today's rock stars are wild and crazy, you haven't seen anything yet. Rod Stewart was a notorious party animal who indulged in cocaine, marijuana, and alcohol on a regular basis. He was also a ladies' man who dated and married some of the most beautiful women in the world, including models, actresses, and royalty. He lived the high life and he loved it. But he also paid a price for his excesses. He suffered from health problems, legal troubles, and personal dramas. He had to deal with rumors, lawsuits, and divorces. He had to face the consequences of his actions and the regrets of his choices. He admitted that he enjoyed drugs in hindsight, but he also wished he had been more careful and responsible. His fellow rock stars also had their share of adventures and controversies. One of the most shocking and legendary stories involved Mick Jagger and David Bowie, two of the biggest icons of the 70s. They were both brilliant, talented, and successful. They met in 1973 and soon became friends and rivals. They admired and challenged each other, and they also flirted and teased each other. They were like magnets drawn to each other by their similarities and differences. 11. Ozzy Osbourne will apparently bite the head off more than a bat. Some rock stars are known for their music, some for their style, and some for their antics. But few are as notorious as Ozzy Osbourne, the metal icon who bit the head off a live bat on stage. A live bat. And that's not the only animal he decapitated with his teeth. Animal lovers, beware. One of his most infamous stunts happened on January 20, 1982 in Des Moines, Iowa. During a concert, a fan threw a bat on stage. Ozzy, thinking it was a rubber toy, picked it up and bit its head off. He soon realized his mistake as blood gushed out of his mouth and the bat's body twitched in his hand. He had to be rushed to the hospital and given rabies shots. The incident made headlines around the world and became a legend in rock history. But that was not the first time Ozzy had bitten the head off an animal. A year earlier, in 1981, he had done the same thing to a dove. He was at a meeting with record executives and he had brought 2 doves as a peace gesture. But when the meeting didn't go well, he decided to make a statement. He grabbed one of the doves, put it in his mouth, and bit its head off. He then spat the head on the table and threw the bloody carcass at the horrified executives. He was kicked out of the building and banned from the label. 10. Tupac's friends smoked him. What would you do to honor the memory of a fallen friend? Some people might light a candle, say a prayer, or visit a grave. But some people might do something more extreme, more outrageous, more unbelievable. That's what Tupac Shakur's group, the Outlaws, did after the legendary rapper was killed in a 1996 Las Vegas shooting. They took his ashes, mixed them with marijuana, and the rest was history. But was it true? Some people doubted the story, thinking it was a hoax or a publicity stunt. But the Outlaws confirmed it in 2011 in an interview. They said they smoked Tupac's ashes at a memorial event for the star which was held on a beach. They said they felt his presence and his blessing. But not everyone was happy with their decision. Tupac's family, especially his mother, Afeni Shakur, was outraged and hurt. They said they had no idea about the smoke session and that they would never participate in such a thing. They said it was disrespectful and disgusting, and that they wanted justice for their son. 9. Gram Parsons' body was stolen. Some people say that death is the end of the story, but for Gram Parsons, it was just the beginning. The country rock pioneer who influenced artists like the Rolling Stones, the Eagles, and Emmylou Harris had a bizarre and macabre afterlife that still fascinates music fans today. His body was stolen by his friend and manager who tried to fulfill his last wish by burning it in the desert. Gram Parsons died on September 19, 1973 at the age of 26 from a drug overdose. He was staying at the Joshua Tree Inn near the national park that he loved and visited often. He had a pact with his friend and manager Phil Kaufman that whoever died first, the other would cremate his body and scatter his ashes in the park. But things didn't go as planned. Parsons' family wanted to bury him in New Orleans, where his father was from. They arranged for his body to be flown there from Los Angeles. Kaufman, however, had other ideas. He and a friend, Michael Martin, drove to the airport in a borrowed hearse disguised as funeral workers. They then drove to Joshua Tree, where they found a secluded spot and set the coffin on fire. But they didn't get away with it. A group of campers saw the flames and smoke and called the authorities. The police arrived and found Kaufman and Martin along with Parsons' partially burned body. They arrested them and charged them with stealing and destroying the coffin. Kaufman and Martin were fined $750 each and had to pay for a new coffin. Parsons' body was eventually buried in New Orleans, but not before some of his ashes were secretly taken by his friends and scattered in Joshua Tree. Kaufman later said that he did what he did out of respect and love for Parsons, and that he had no regrets. 8. The reason behind David Bowie's eyes. David Bowie was a mystery. A legend, a chameleon. He changed his style, his sound, and his persona many times throughout his career. Many people assume that Bowie had heterochromia, a rare condition that causes a person to have two different iris colors. Some celebrities, like Kate Bosworth and Mila Kunis, have this condition, and it gives them a unique and striking look. But Bowie was not one of them. His eyes were not actually different colors, they just appeared to be. The reason for this optical illusion was a condition called anisocoria, which means that one pupil is permanently larger than the other. In Bowie's case, his left pupil was always dilated, making his left eye look darker than his right eye. This also made his left eye more prone to red eye effects, which sometimes added to the contrast. It was not something he was born with, but something he acquired when he was 15 years old. He got into a fight with his friend George Underwood over a girl they both liked. Underwood punched him in the eye, scratching his cornea and damaging his iris. The injury left Bowie with a permanently dilated pupil and a lifelong friendship with Underwood. Bowie never regretted his eye injury and even thanked Underwood for giving him a kind of mystique. He used his eyes to his advantage, enhancing his image and his charisma. He made his eyes part of his art and part of his legacy. 7. Elvis Presley really did insult his backup singers in the Catfish incident. Elvis Presley was the king of rock and roll, the man who changed the face of music and culture. But he was not perfect. He had his flaws, his faults, his moments of weakness. He had his dark side, his temper, his ego. He had his enemies, his rivals, his critics. And sometimes he had his outbursts, his insults, his scandals. Like the time he offended his backup singers in the Catfish incident. It happened in 1970 during a recording session for his album Elvis Country. Elvis was working with a group of female singers known as the Sweet Inspirations who had been with him since 1969. They were a talented and professional group who had also sung for Aretha Franklin, Dionne Warwick, and Dusty Springfield. They were also black, which was not a problem for Elvis, who had grown up listening to and admiring black music. But it was a problem for one of his producers, Felton Jarvis, who was a racist and a bigot. He didn't like the Sweet Inspirations, and he didn't want them to sing with Elvis. He tried to sabotage them by giving them wrong notes, bad cues, and rude comments. He also tried to persuade Elvis to fire them by telling him lies and rumors about them. One of the lies he told Elvis was that the Sweet Inspirations had been eating catfish in their dressing room and that they had left a mess and a smell. He said that they were ungrateful and disrespectful and that they didn't deserve to work with him. He said that they were catfish and that Elvis was a king. Elvis believed him and he was furious. He confronted the Sweet Inspirations and he called them catfish. He said that they were dirty and disgusting and that they had no place in his music. He said that he was the king and that they were nothing. The Sweet Inspirations were shocked and hurt. They had done nothing wrong and they had always respected and admired Elvis. They had given him their best and he had given them his worst. They felt betrayed and humiliated and they walked out of the session. Elvis soon realized his mistake and he apologized. He said that he had been misled and manipulated and that he had acted rashly and wrongly. He said that he valued and appreciated the Sweet Inspirations and that he wanted them back. He said that he was sorry and that he loved them. The Sweet Inspirations forgave him and they returned to the session. They continued to work with Elvis and they remained friends until his death in 1977. They said that he was a good man who had a bad moment. They said that he was human like everyone else. Elvis Presley insulting his backup singers in the Catfish incident was a rare and regrettable episode in his career. It was a time when he showed his worst side instead of his best. It was a time when he tarnished his image instead of enhancing it. It was a time when he created a controversy instead of a legacy. And it was a time when he learned a lesson instead of a song. 6. Van Morrison recorded 30 songs in a single day. How many songs can you write and record in a day? 1, 2, 5? How about 30? That's what Van Morrison did in 1967 when he created one of the most prolific and bizarre albums in music history. The sheer productivity of this legendary artist is both mind-boggling and awe-inspiring. Van Morrison was a young and talented singer-songwriter who had just scored a hit with his song Brown Eyed Girl. He was also a frustrated and unhappy artist who wanted to get out of his contract with Bang Records, a label that he felt was exploiting and controlling him. He had signed a deal that gave the label the rights to all of his songs, and he wanted to regain his creative freedom. So he came up with a plan. He decided to record a bunch of songs that were so bad, so ridiculous, and so nonsensical that the label would reject them and release him from his contract. He went to a studio in New York, and in one day he recorded 30 songs, most of which were improvised on the spot. But his plan backfired. The label accepted the songs and released them as an album called The Contractual Obligation Session. They also sued him for breach of contract and prevented him from recording with another label for 3 years. Van Morrison was stuck and he hated it. But he also made history. His album became a cult classic, a curiosity, and a treasure. Some fans and critics praised his courage, his humor, and his genius. Some even found beauty and depth in his songs and covered them with respect and admiration. Some said that he had created a masterpiece, a protest, and a joke. 5. Keith Moon and Mama Cass died in the same room. Death is inevitable, but sometimes it is also unpredictable, unexpected, and unexplainable. Sometimes it strikes in ways that defy logic, reason, and coincidence. Sometimes it leaves behind a trail of questions, mysteries, and legends. Like the case of Keith Moon and Mama Cass, two rock stars who died in the same room 4 years apart. Keith Moon was the drummer of The Who, one of the most influential and explosive bands of the 60s and 70s. He was known for his wild and reckless style both on and off stage. He smashed his drums, drove his cars into pools, and consumed copious amounts of drugs and alcohol. He was a genius, a madman, and a legend. Mama Cass was the singer of the Mamas and the Papas, one of the most popular and harmonious groups of the 60s. She was known for her powerful and soulful voice, her warm and bubbly personality, and her struggle with weight and health. She was a star, a friend, and a mother. They were both icons of their era, but they had little in common. They met only once, briefly, at a party in London in 1974. They didn't know each other well, and they didn't share any musical or personal ties, but they shared something else. Fate. They both died in the same flat at 12 Curzon Place in Mayfair, London. The flat belonged to Harry Nilsson, a singer-songwriter and a friend of both Moon and Cass. Cass died first on July 29, 1974. She had just finished a successful run of shows at the London Palladium and was planning to return to the US. She went to bed in Nilsson's flat and never woke up. She died of heart failure at the age of 32. Moon died next on September 7, 1978. He had just watched a movie with Paul McCartney and was trying to stay sober and clean. He went to bed in Nilsson's flat and overdosed on pills that were meant to help him with his alcohol withdrawal. He died of an accidental poisoning at the age of 32. They both died in the same bed, in the same room, at the same age, in the same flat. 4. Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old cousin. Myra Lewis Williams, also known as Myra Gale Brown, was Jerry Lee Lewis's third wife and more notably his 13-year-old cousin at the time of their marriage. The Whole Lotta Shakin' Going On and Great Balls of Fire hitmaker eloped with Myra Gale Brown in December 1957 following a courtship that began when he moved into the Memphis home of Myra's father, J.W. Brown, Lewis's cousin and bass player. Lewis was 22 and Williams was 13, and the press attacked him when it was learned that she was also his second cousin and that Lewis was still married to his second wife, Jane Mitchum, at the time they married. The revelation prompted the quick cancellation of Lewis's tour. Plus, he was banned by radio and his revenues plunged overnight. Lewis would need years to reestablish his career. There were a few rock and roll hits, but Lewis didn't find his commercial stride again until he became a country performer in 1968. He remained perplexed as to what he'd done wrong, albeit the fact that Myra was originally stated to be 15 rather than 13 shows that someone, somewhere, suspected there was a problem. Sadly, he continued to record music and perform in theaters during this time, and he made a comeback roughly a decade later. 3. Led Zeppelin's drummer died after drinking 40 shots of vodka. Rock and roll is a dangerous game, and no one played it harder than John Bonham, the drummer of Led Zeppelin. He was a powerhouse, a beast, a legend. He was the man who pounded the drums with such force and speed that he made them sound like thunder. He was the man who inspired countless drummers, from Dave Grohl to Lars Ulrich. He was the man who defined the sound and the spirit of Led Zeppelin. But he was also a man who loved to drink, and drink a lot. He was known for his legendary drinking prowess, which often led to wild and crazy antics. He once drove a motorcycle through a hotel lobby. He once threw a television out of a window. And he once set fire to a hotel room. He was a man who lived on the edge and who didn't know when to stop. And that's what killed him. On September 24, 1980, he drank 40 shots of vodka, or about 1.5 liters, in a span of 12 hours. He was at the home of Jimmy Page, the guitarist of Led Zeppelin, preparing for a tour in America. He went to bed and never woke up. He died of asphyxiation after choking on his own vomit. He was 32 years old. His death was a shock, a tragedy, and a loss. It was the end of Led Zeppelin, who decided to disband after his passing. It was the end of an era, of a generation, of a legend. It was the end of John Bonham, the drummer who drank himself to death. But it was also the beginning of a legacy, of a myth, of an icon. His death was a reminder of his life, of his talent, of his passion. His death was a catalyst for his fans who mourned him, honored him, and celebrated him. His death was a mark of his greatness, of his influence, of his immortality. He was the drummer who lived on in rock and roll. 2. Keith Richards doesn't sleep. Sleep is essential for human health and well-being, but not for Keith Richards, the legendary guitarist of the Rolling Stones. He is a man who defies the laws of nature, the rules of society, and the limits of the human body. He is a man who doesn't sleep, or at least not much. That's what he claims, and that's what many people believe. He says that he sleeps only 2 or 3 hours a night, and sometimes not at all. He says that he doesn't need sleep and that he prefers to live in the moment. He says that he has a natural energy and that he gets his rest from music. But how does he do it? How does he survive without sleep and still rock and roll like no other? How does he cope with the effects of sleep deprivation such as fatigue, irritability, and impaired judgment? How does he avoid the risks of chronic insomnia such as heart disease, diabetes, and dementia? Some say that he does it with the help of drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes. He has a notorious history of substance abuse which he has admitted and regretted. He has experimented with various drugs from cocaine to heroin, and he has consumed vast amounts of alcohol and tobacco. He has overdosed, been arrested, and nearly died several times. But he has also quit, or at least cut down on most of his vices. He says that he is clean, sober, and healthy, and that he has no plans to stop. He says that he is happy, content, and grateful, and that he has no regrets. He also says that he is lucky, blessed, and immortal, and that he has no fears. Keith Richards not sleeping is a rumor that adds to his legend, his mystique, and his icon status. It is a rumor that shows his strength, his spirit, and his passion. It is a rumor that makes us wonder, how does he do it? And it is a rumor that makes us admire him even more. 1. If you've bought the Kiss comic book, you have blood on your hands. Kiss is a rock band that knows how to make a statement. With their flamboyant costumes, pyrotechnic shows, and catchy songs, they have captivated millions of fans around the world. They have also created a brand, merchandise, and a comic book. But there is something sinister about their comic book, something that may make you think twice before buying it. Something that involves blood, and not just any blood, but their own blood. That's right, the Kiss comic book contains the actual blood of the band members. It's a claim so outrageous it sounds like a hoax, but it's not. It's a fact, a stunt, and a scandal. It's a marketing strategy that took a dark and twisted turn and that created a shocking and controversial revelation. It happened in 1977 when Kiss teamed up with Marvel Comics to produce a comic book based on their personas and adventures. They wanted to make their comic book special, unique, and authentic. They wanted to make their comic book part of them, literally. So they came up with a crazy idea to mix their blood with the red ink used to print the comic book. They did it, and they filmed it. They went to a notary public who witnessed and certified the process. They each drew a vial of blood and they poured it into a barrel of ink. They then signed a contract and they sealed the deal. They had given their blood to their comic book and they had given their comic book to their fans. But they also gave their fans a dilemma, a moral and ethical quandary. How would their fans feel about buying a comic book that contained the blood of their idols? How would they feel about holding, reading, and collecting a comic book that was tainted with human tissue? How would they feel about having blood on their hands, and not just any blood, but the blood of Kiss? Kiss's comic book blood stunt was a controversial claim that added a touch of eerie mystery to the turbulent 70s music scene. It was a claim that showed their creativity, their daring, and their madness. It was a claim that made us wonder, what were they thinking? And it was a claim that made us admire them even more. There you have it, folks. the 20 more rumors about musicians that turned out to be totally true. The music world is full of surprises, scandals, and jaw-dropping moments. Stay tuned for more controversial tales from the world of rock and roll. Until next time, keep the music alive and the rumors rocking.